Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and I am a reporter for the Real News Network Baltimore Bureau. Obviously, like many women across the country, I am moved by the Me Too movement. Not just the stories of the women who have suffered abuse, but the recognition of just how deeply entrenched sexism and sexual exploitation is in the places where women work and live. And I've also been concerned that experiences of women of color with harassment have not been given the proper attention. As a reporter, I've had the privilege of covering the state capital of Annapolis. It's the place where state leaders gather to make the laws that govern the lives of Marylanders across the state. But recently, serious allegations of abuse have surfaced, and the response to the complaints has been lackluster at best. So as a woman and a journalist, I had the honor of sitting down with 3 women who were willing to share their firsthand experience with sexual harassment and the consequences of standing up. I was so moved by their courage that I've decided to run all the interviews without cutting a single second. I feel the stories they shared are too important to abbreviate or edit in any way. Therefore, I will be posting these pieces unabridged over the next few days. I hope they will help to heal the wounds of the women who have suffered and begin a dialogue on how to address the lax attitudes and legal barriers that make the exploitation of women so pervasive in our state capital. Either way, I remain committed as a journalist and a woman of color to bringing these stories to light. My guests are Brittany Oliver, a women's rights activist and director of the social justice organization Not Without Black Women, Delegate Angela Angel, and Nina Smith, a communications consultant and former Annapolis staffer. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
I think that one of the things that, especially with Not Without Black Women, what we have found is that lots of women, these are not stories that I've heard I hear these stories all the time from women who within our organization. And so when we come together once a month to have our sister circle talks where we meet at different restaurants and venues across the city, and we talk about we just have food and drinks and kind of social time and talked about what issues we're going with. This is what I hear. This is what I listen to, and so Not Without Black Women is dedicated towards empowering women to take back their power and trying to find ways for women to feel there is someone that cares about you and that supports you and that you can make a difference. Right. And that was really what the overall goal is with getting this bill passed. And I wanted to add something in to what Nina had mentioned about consent. Another aspect of that Not Without Black Women wants to focus on in partnership with Hollaback Baltimore is to drive the narrative and the conversations around bystander intervention. Bystander intervention is how people, when you're in a space and you are being harassed or abused in some sort of way, how do the people around you, what is the role that the people around you play, right? Because you don't have to be a rapist to perpetuate, this culture.
Right.
There are a variety, and this is what makes up institutionalized sexism that creates rape culture. Because there are more than one, there are people who make up a system that allows survivors to not feel protected. So the people in your life, whether they're at work or at home, your friends, your family, how are they standing up to protect you? Are they speaking up? Do they have the skills to do so? Right. And so one of our goals moving forward from this is to continue to talk about this issue, but also action steps on how to move forward as well.
Now, oh, go ahead.
And that's actually a part of the training that we've talked about for the legislature that's going to come in. That was one of the things that came out during one of our women's caucus thing, and I brought it up, is bystander training. Because I think in Annapolis, part of the reason why it becomes so outrageous and the culture is because many times these things happen in front of other people. And I'll admit, I've had colleagues that things have happened in front of me and I'm frozen and I don't know what to do. Like, this is someone who's over me, who if I piss off, who knows what the repercussions could be. Right. And so including that bystander training, for women, for other legislators, in some ways, I understand why, when a senior member did something to me and there's another senior member, maybe they don't know how to react, right? Because once again, heck, they can hold their legislation up. Right. But figuring out how to say that, and even, for instance, one of the things I think probably by my second year I began to do is when like coarse jokes were made about friends of mine, or and I will admit, mostly friends that I would stick up for. I would be like, you know what, that's out of line, you know, and they'd be like, oh, come on, Angel, and I'm like, you know what, I'm not, and I did in such a way, I was like, I'm not trying to come, I'm not going to get all bent out of shape, but I'm just going to say, like, you shouldn't say that about her. And I began doing that, but that was something that, and it probably took till after like my second year. And I think even this was after the incident with my bill being held on the floor. And I think part of it was just like, I've seen the worst, that, you know, I've seen what y'all do. So part of it was just like, you know, I've been hit with their best shot, so I'm tougher skin now. But being able to do that, but having someone that trains and does this type of bystander training work for the members of the legislature, and that's one of the things that the bill has asked that will be incorporated, is super powerful to change the culture. Right. And that's what's needed. You know, there's a culture change, because part of what has happened is this has become acceptable. It's normal. It's par for the course. Yeah. And so in some ways, you know, and I'm always cautious, right, because I don't want to excuse behavior. Right. But I understand how, for some of these folks, like, this is just what's okay. You know, this is what they've always, since they've came into the legislature, this is what they've seen, this is what's happened. It's actually better now.
That's what they tell us.
It's sad, but in some ways it's better now than what it used to be, because from what I hear, you know, there were certain legislators like back in the day who were like out and out, like actual assault was more rampant. Actual rapes were taking place. Wow. And so this is, you know, and it's also, as we see progression.
People were raping their fellow legislators and staffers. They're committing sexual assaults.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way. If you heard about stuff, it wasn't necessarily shocking. Wow. I know over the course of my tenure, and again, that was the arc of my testimony, I started out receiving the advice, I left giving the advice.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now, Brittany, I'm going to switch a little bit, because I know you have mentioned something called #MarylandMeToo, and I want to know what you're going to do next. But first, I want to ask you a little bit closer to home. You've already tackled Annapolis, but there's other governmental agencies that have cultures of sexism that need to be addressed. The one that comes to mind for me is Baltimore City Police Department. We know back in 2016, they had the Department of Justice do an investigation which showed that there was sexist, unconstitutional, and racist practices, which led to the consent decree, right? So some of the things police officers did was unfound rape reports, misclassify them, poor treatment of women, having women exchange sex for their freedom, and to this day, I don't think it's illegal for a police officer to have sex with someone who he has arrested and is in his custody.
We changed that.
You have just passed that?
We passed a bill this year that...
It did get done?
Yes. I need to verify.
I think so.
Yes.
I can't remember.
And the irony is, I sat in on that. I sat in on the vote session of that bill. And it was interesting that the legislators that were voting on the bill were like, they're like, it's illegal already. They did not know that that there was this loophole. And I remember after the session, because I was aware of it, going up to them and being like, I was like, because they tabled the bill at first, and I said, you all need to pass it. I was like, it's a loophole that it's not covered. And so I remember talking with the folks on that committee. They're like, we're going to pass it. But they had no idea that there was this loophole that allowed for that to happen.
That's incredible. So we know that the police department has an incredible number of bad actors in it, some really sexist practices. What can Me Too do to address the issues of women in Baltimore City, for example, when they're dealing with law enforcement?
Sure. So what I can say, so from the Baltimore uprising and with the consent decree, what came out of that, I was actually one of the advocates that worked on getting the consent decree passed. During that time, I was working with the ACLU, and I was also working. Directing Hollaback Baltimore, and so the benefit of advocacy around both organizations, or my affiliations with the two, is that we were able to focus a lot on these disparities around women specifically in their interactions with police officers. And I remember doing a number of community discussions on those issues. I actually held one here at the Real News Network. And so I think that Right. Hashtag MDMeToo was basically, the point of coming up with that was just to localize Me Too, since it had started out in Hollywood and kind of on a national scale. And so we wanted to add the MD part, that stands for Maryland, to that hashtag so that folks in the state of Maryland, survivors, could feel that this issue means that this means it's in your community as well. What I'll say is that the work that we've done in Annapolis, the reason why I was so passionate about going forward with this legislation and doing all the work necessary to get it passed is so that it can pretty much serve as an example for when we get back to Baltimore.
Okay.
And right now, the way I like to describe what's happening is that this is a movement. This is a movement where we're going to have to start getting some wins out of these issues, and so legislative, getting a bill passed, and so if we can get a bill passed on this issue in Annapolis, which is making a difference, we can do the same thing, in Baltimore. And so I think that right now, one of the things that that we can do in Baltimore specifically is, one, we can believe survivors.
Right.
When survivors are speaking out, whether it be through a tweet or social media, or in any instance, believing survivors first, because it's coming from somewhere. Even if they're not naming their abusers or harassers, it's okay for people to not name, because that's not the issue. The issue is the culture that has allowed, that has taken away survivors' power from being able to advocate on the issue. So believing survivors, I think that we also need to find a way to have a culture shift in the narrative about rape culture. This is not an issue that only affects white women.
Right.
That is a false statement. It is a false idea that rape culture, abuse, harassment, street harassment are white women's issues. We need to stop telling women of color, particularly Black women, that these issues are not theirs, because it is.
Absolutely right.
It's harmful. It sets us back. It doesn't move us forward. And if we are about unity and creating change, and especially under the current circumstances we're happening right now under the administration, the presidential administration, all these different battles that we have that are coming towards us, if we really are dedicated towards creating change in this city, from whether it be from Baltimore to Annapolis to the entire state, we must start allowing, creating space for women of color and Black women to take on these issues in a way that's most meaningful to them. A third thing I would say, in terms of action for Baltimore specifically, I think that we need to invest resources and funding to women such as myself, who are doing the work, and who have been doing the work for little resources.
Okay.
Not Without Black Women is a volunteer organization, and we've only been doing the work we've been doing for about 8 months. And
you've already had a major victory in Annapolis. It's really quite impressive.
So start investing, allowing survivors, because I'm a survivor myself. I'm a sexual assault survivor. I'm a homicide survivor. Put us in positions of leadership for us to advocate on our own issues so that we can get the job done. Invest in people who have the most skin in the game to get the job done, because that's what we did in Annapolis. And also, I'd say another would be, in terms of the police, is working with other organizations who are doing this work, finding a way to collaborate with other entities who are doing this work, such as Hollaback Baltimore, such as Force Upsetting Rape Culture, other organizations, other women who are doing the same type of work, and finding comprehensive strategies around how do we hold police officers accountable?
Right.
How do we hold not only police officers, our people, men who we interact with on a day-to-day basis? Is there a commission? Can we create a commission so that when women are experiencing these things, they have somewhere to go? In the past 6 months, women who have contacted me for help and assistance, the number one thing that I hear them say to me is that I'm contacting you because you have a platform. And I don't have a platform. No one will believe me. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't have a platform, would anybody listen to me?
It's a good question.
Would anybody listen to me or other women if I didn't have access in the way that I did?
Absolutely. Or knowledge of the system.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what helped us. I mean, when you're a former staffer, you know how Annapolis works.
Right. Right.
You know what the amendments process is. You know how to press certain buttons when it comes to. I mean, we did a lot of media work, so we were working with reporters. We were talking to reporters about what was happening, keeping them up to date, so that there was that external pressure for them to do the right thing. And so we were very strategic in how, because we knew we had to be. That was the only way we were going to. I mean, we could have gotten. There were plenty of nights where I freaked out. I lost my stuff. I was crying. You saw me cry a little bit here. You know, it's because you're right. We had so much skin in the game. I would add to that there's a political component here. What we're seeing is just this general sense of lack of accountability, whether it's legislators, whether it's police officers, and the political structures reinforce those things. So, you know, if these accusations are happening, who's prosecuting them? Why haven't they been prosecuted? Are there holes in the law? Well, if there are holes in the law, then why haven't the state legislators, you know, looked at that piece? So I think there are things that we need to be, there are questions that we need to start asking, right? I think there's an awareness that we need to lean into. These elections aren't pretty, they aren't sexy, they can be boring. I know for the average person, you know, it's just not their thing. I understand that, but it affects your everyday life. Like, you know, you have that complaint against that police officer. Well, you know, you elect your state's attorney, you elect your judges, you elect your mayor, you elect your city council, you elect your state legislator. There are all these people who get, they're not getting paid astronomically, but it's their job to listen to you and to advocate on your behalf. And we need to start forcing them to do so.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that, you know, I'm a part of quite a few national organizations, and in other states, you'll notice, like people said, you know, in California, where they named people, in New York, and in other states where they were.
I'm sorry, your mic. Sorry about that.
Oh, this necklace. So I'm a member of a couple of national organizations that have addressed similar issues about sexual harassment in the legislature, and like you're talking about the police and other things which are still accountable to the state legislature because we create some of the laws that regulate their activities, right? And so people ask me, well, why aren't you naming names in Maryland? And why in California they called people out. In other places they've called people out. And I said one of the differences are those places have turnover. So it's not the same people in power. And so in here, you know, you have people who have been in power longer than I've been alive. And so they're ingrained. So they're in, and that's and because they've been in power so long, and because, like Nina says, people don't pay attention. They go into the voting booth, they push a button. You know, they get
and check off the name they recognize.
And they check off the name they recognize, or they get a slate. You know, and especially we're talking about Baltimore and Prince George's County, where we've typically been run by slates. You get this thing that's told this is the ballot, and people, you know, you've ever walked in. I've worked elections. Like, I've got my ballot. That's not a ballot. That's a propaganda piece, right? But people are just pushing these buttons. So part of one of the reasons why victims can't come forward is because this person's always been there. They've been there for the past 20 years. What am I, you know, going to do? How am I going to come forward? Because truth be told, outside of an actual criminal finding, they've rarely expelled a legislator. So the fact of the matter is, the very reality is, and one of the reasons victims know, everyone could find my statement to be true, and this person will still hold their seat.
Wow.
And so why would I risk all of that? And so one of the things as voters is you have to be thinking about that. You know, we are sending the same folks there. You wonder why some of the laws haven't changed and why I was so certain this law wasn't going to change is because, you know, the same people that have been there have certain views. And because the way our system is set up, they don't have to justify why they don't pass a bill. It just goes in the drawer. And you're not allowed to question them because that's the way the system is set up. And so when we're talking about elections have consequences, you know, if you keep sending the same people back, they have unchallenged and unquestionable power.
Yes. Unchecked.
Unchecked. And that's what we have here. And that's one of the reasons why our culture, you know, and it's become so insane. And even why you won't have victims. Why, to this day, we can't name some of these names. These people are still holding power.
Okay.
They're still holding power. And if we were to, what I have been assured is what could rain down on us,
Right.
you can't even fathom.
And on that note, I'd like to thank my guests, Brittany Oliver, Nina Smith, and Delegate Angela Angel for joining me for this important conversation and sharing their truths with me. And I want to thank you for joining me, your host, Taya Graham, at the Real News Network.